All right, friends, here we are once again with our good friend, the Solitary Adventurer. Everyone who is part of our community here on YouTube and on our Patreon, our growing Patreon, check it out for a cup of coffee a month. You guys know him as a Solitary Adventurer. He is very well researched and a longtime fan of Prince. He's a joy to talk to. I learn a lot from him, as we all do. I learn a lot from everybody. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm quite good. Where are you in England?
I'm at Hadrian's Wall, which is the old Roman wall that sort of bridged the north end of England.
Okay.
It's not quite the border of Scotland, but I think it was designed to keep the barbarians north of them. So
Okay.
it's quite a historic site. It's very, very pretty.
Is that pre-William Wallace or post-William Wallace?
Very much pre. It's about 2,000 years old. I think
Okay.
it was one of the last Roman emperors had it built. Yeah.
Now I feel kind of silly here, okay, folks. Yeah, because I mean, William Wallace was like what? It was 1,000 years ago, or 900,
Probably, yeah.
give or take.
But these guys were speaking Latin.
As soon as you said Hadrian's Wall, the first thing I thought about was the Black Sabbath War Pigs. Was that something about Luke's Wall? It's not Hadrian's Wall. Anyway, okay. I'm kind of digressing here with my old man age here. Been hitting the head too many times. So I think what we'll do, let's start it off with a couple of Patreon questions, and we'll go from there. Okay, so one of our questions from one of our Patreons, we got a bunch of them here. Mike Machete, we'll probably have Mike on for the after show. I'd be interested in Solitary Adventurer's take on some of the unreleased gems. So he mentions a bunch. Maybe for right now, we'll just talk about Possessed.
Okay, so Possessed is a song, I think it was written in 82, and then it was sort of revisited in 85. So it was contemplated for the 1999 album, and then it was sort of revisited around the time of Purple Rain, possibly as like a B-side for one of the singles. An amazing track, real sort of Lindrum funk workout, and could well have taken the place of something like Automatic or Dance Music Sex Romance on the 1999 album, and would have fit in perfectly with that sort of time. But it's another one of those songs where, because he went back to it a couple of years later, there's an extra version of it where he's sort of replaced some of the instrumentation and, you know, tweaked some of the lyrics, and then you've got a new song with a whole different feel.
Okay.
And just shows the genius of him for rearranging and reimagining his work.
So after Mike's asked a few questions about different songs and whatever, but what we like to do here for our Patreon, we do an after show where we have some of the Patreons join us on Zoom. We talk and get into these heavy discussions, and we'll probably be seeing Mike, so we'll answer some of those other questions later. Moving along, our good buddy also from England, we know him as Endless Rage, but Mark Brandwood, what is the best after show party attended? These could be better than the main shows. I've heard that very often. The best after show party that you've attended?
So I was really lucky to be living in the area of the O2 Arena when Prince did his 21 nights in London. I went to quite a few of those after shows. I think I only missed one where he actually played. And there's one that sticks out in mind. Now, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but I would say it's the most sort of special in Prince terms. So he did one after show where it was a three-piece, a drummer, bass, and he played rhythm and did vocals and did everything on the guitar that night. And they played as tight as I've seen a band play.
You told me some stories from some of the after shows too, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll give you the other one. So I think that's the most special one because it's a really unique thing for someone to be that capable to just front a band in front of a rhythm section. Yeah. But my personal favorite, I was there with my brother. These after shows sort of started around 1:30, 2 in the morning sometimes. And we were about 10 minutes away from calling it quits. And I heard some noise from behind the curtain, and we were leaning up against the stage. And I said to my brother, like, we have to stay. There's obviously something going on behind. Even if they're just packing away the instruments, let's hang on for 10 minutes. So I hear some more noises, and the next thing I hear the band strike up and the curtain just starts to pull back. But there's wood immediately in front of me. So I look up, and it's the back of a Hammond organ or a keyboard, and right at the top of where I'm looking at the top of the wood is Prince's head, and he's playing Superstition by Stevie Wonder. So he starts to sing, and it's amazing, because
Wow.
to hear him do any cover is amazing, but it's a really authentic version of Superstition.
Yeah.
And I look just to the side of this Hammond organ, and it's the Hohner Telecaster, the guitar. And I don't know what sort of struck me, but I started to put my hand out to touch this guitar, and he just leaned forward and went, to me. And it kind of struck me. So I look at my brother and I was like, did he really just tell me don't touch that?
Yeah.
So we had a great laugh at that. And then a few minutes after he finishes the Stevie Wonder songs, this Hammond organ gets pulled off to the side by the stagehand. And instead of just picking up the guitar and putting it on, he picks the guitar up, but deliberately does that near my face as he goes to put the guitar on. So for just a little interaction, that's my favorite after show, because it was the closest I came to contact.
And what was the year of that again?
2007, August, September, that sort of the end of the summer in England.
So in a way, you could say I did talk to Prince.
In a way.
In a way, right?
Yeah. But
okay.
the after shows, they really were magical. And I think they were magical just because he was off the leash.
Okay.
So the band were incredibly tight, incredibly well rehearsed. If he wanted to play a song or a cover song or something, it gave him the ability to. Now, the downside is I was too young for a lot of the best after shows, which were probably the first after shows he really gave, which in 1988 on the Love Sexy tour. This thing suddenly is born, the after show performance. And I think for a while there, while they were truly innovative and the band were excited by them, I think they're probably the best after shows that, I've certainly heard the bootlegs of them, and they are phenomenal.
So one of the things I've said about the after shows, we have a few more questions, and then we're going to actually start our actual discussion. But
Okay.
The thing about the after shows, now, again, I don't like, I'm not trying to compare to Prince in any way, because I don't compare to Prince. But as a regional performer, he was an international performer, but as a little regional performer, I remember when I'd play in bands and the singers would complain about being tired as the night would go on. And I think, oh, you sissy. But then once I actually got into doing vocals, and I was actually at a point where I was co-fronting a regional band, singing half the night, I got it. But so, again, one of the things when I watch Prince and do my reaction videos, I kind of watch him and realize how boring I must have been to watch on stage. But but singing, playing guitar, fronting a band, and we won't even get into like the athletic ability, the cardio, the stuff that he had to do. Like, can you imagine? Have you ever stopped to think? And this is a question for everyone out there: how many calories he would have burned in a concert?
Yeah, for a guy who reputedly didn't eat that much.
Yeah. So
and it's crazy.
Some people might make an argument and say, well, he had road crew to take care of everything. He didn't have to load out or anything. Yeah, that's true. But to still have the energy after that type of performance and go do an after show, like I can't, even if I was 20 years younger, that'd be hard for me to comprehend. I'd be like, when I would perform regionally, if I had a 2-hour drive ahead of me to get home, like it'd take everything in me just to go, grab a coffee for the drive home and make the 2-hour drive. I couldn't imagine playing and singing, doing that. That's phenomenal. I don't know if people really realize.
It's a real can of worms if you start to look into it. I mean, you've got a guy here. You've done sound check before.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe 30 minutes. Make sure that the mic is working. Make sure your guitar's plugged in.
It all depends on the venue. It depends if we were doing our own sound. We always had our own PA system, but sometimes we would, if we were performing at fairs or certain A clubs that had sound and they had a sound guy. Sound check could be anywhere from an hour and a half to 5 minutes. It all depends on the situation.
Yeah. So he'd regularly do 4 hours.
Yeah.
And that, half of that is working the band, just to warm them up and give him license to be creative, because he's got the venue, he's got the band in one place. But it gives him an opportunity to get creative. He'd then play the gig, a few hours off, a shower, what have you, and he would make the call: am I going to the studio, or am I going to an after party, an after show? And for periods of his career, more often than not, he would go and do the after show, and he'd be there for an hour and a half to 3 hours sometimes. So I think it was more just how much of this is his life. And there's two ways you can look at it. Is he just an incredibly lonely guy at periods of his life? This is the way he fills it. Or is he that creative and perhaps stinted in the concert itself to stick to a running order because of lighting and all of the things that go into putting the concert on? He doesn't have the flexibility to play, so he does that at the after show.
I'm going to pull the veil off kind of a secret for people that might not be musicians and they're just music fans, but I'm going to, from a working musician's perspective, I'm going to bring something up. I think you and I might have briefly touched on this in the past, but we get into music because, we have an interest in an instrument. We want to just have fun. Some of us, for whatever reasons, pursue the instrument more seriously than others. We get into playing with friends, teenage bands, all that other stuff. But one of the sad things that really happens as a musician, and being a musician, if you can make a good living on any level, my hat's off to you. It took me time to figure out how to do it. I knew a lot of musicians who there's a point to we're going to call this a Bryanism when I do have this big roundabout story. I remember I knew a lot of musicians that, would always bitch and complain about, oh, if I just had a gig where I could just get my bills paid. But then I'd see them, I'd say, they're just lazy. They just don't want to get up off their ass and put in the work. But unfortunately, what does happen when you get into bands, when you get hired, when you get into a working situation, it's like a relationship. For a lot of people, they get comfortable. And you just look at it as a job. So now I'm not going to say Prince, but there's a lot of acts that come out and they put on the show and they know how to do it. But in their head, some of them, they're thinking about, I just want to finish the show, get off stage, go home, go to bed, or, have a few beers and get paid. So I guess what I'm trying to also tell people is, I always want to have a good product. I was never a big fan of rehearsing, but at the same time, if you want to have a good stage show, you have to rehearse. And I became very leery of people that really had a problem rehearsing. Not only the fact that because they weren't getting paid to rehearse, but also that they had really lost the fun of the music. I think Prince would have been a slave driver. He was, we talk about all these other things, how he good was the music, with the composition of that. He was a special human, not just as a physical specimen. The energy that he would put out. I've heard from you, and I've heard from many people, he didn't sleep much. So he, in his own way, he was a physical specimen, and he probably demanded some of that from people that were working for him. I can tell you there's probably times he wasn't the funnest guy to work for, but if you could get through it and you just could connect with him on that level and give him what he asked of you, it was probably a huge breakthrough, probably not even as a musician learning about business, as a performer, probably as a human being, because he probably would test people in ways that they're not used to being tested. He probably, again, one of the things I struggle with is understanding the chronological order of all the musicians and all the lineups he had. It's something I'm trying to work at. I'm starting to remember names, but I'm sure many fell by the wayside. They just couldn't, he probably burned them out, or they just couldn't get through what he needed. There's probably lots of people don't even know about.
Possibly, yeah. So let me give you a couple of things that put that in context. So I'm reading the book by Dwayne Tudol at the moment, where he speaks about the 1985, 86, 87 period.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of stories in that where everybody who was in the camp said that they felt it was like a tour of duty.
Yeah.
So you knew it wasn't going to last forever, perhaps, but while it was lasting, the normal rules didn't apply, because there's periods where Prince is shooting Under the Cherry Moon in 1986. He has to go back and do some additional filming and things. So he's traveling back to France for maybe 3 or 4 days and then coming back to Minneapolis, or he's going to LA to the studio. But the band are still in Minneapolis, and the band are rehearsing 10 till 6. and they would video it, and they would FedEx the rehearsal video to Prince, who would FedEx it back with notes. Now he's in a different time zone, in a different country, doing things that he needs to do for a film. Yet somehow he still has the time to be able to do that. And perhaps it's because he's got an extra, 6 or 7 hours, if he's not sleeping anything more than a nap. He's got that extra time. But I think it says more about the dedication and the professionalism that the band aren't slacking off while he's not there, but also the respect that they must have for him as a band leader, that they don't even try to. So apparently, at that time, Wendy would sort of take on the mantle of leader, which I don't think will surprise anyone, given Wendy Melvoin's persona. But the other interesting thing is they would rehearse in front of a mirror. Now, you've touched on this a couple of times. How did he know about the presentation side of things? Well, if you're rehearsing in front of a mirror and he says, drummer, you look ugly, or drummer, your hands don't look right, they know exactly because they're looking at it too. And the band talk about fixing their mistakes really quickly because they can see exactly what he means. Now, that concept of rehearsing in front of a mirror became, let's review the tape of the concert. So they've just done a 2.5-hour concert. He gets the VHS straight in the machine and talks the band through. You missed an intro there. Let's change that for next time.
Yeah.
And that sticks with him right the way through his career.
Yeah.
So every band got the video treatment straight after the gig. So he's asking a hell of a lot of people to not only do a normal work day, as if it's, 9 to 5 working class, but also to be able to have the patience to have him critique them. But they knew it was making them better. So it's a real melting pot of discipline, but discipline it is,
I'm I'm wired on caffeine, and when I get wired on caffeine, I do my Bryanisms. We could do these. I always think of like these different concepts to kind of relate to what you're talking about. And I'll try and just bring it up quick to bring back to what you're saying. Are you into film at all?
Oh yeah.
So James Cameron, you're familiar with the director James Cameron?
Sure.
So I'm going to talk about when they filmed the movie Aliens. Okay, I'm into that stuff. I've got all the documentaries and everything for that. So James Cameron, when he came over, he's Canadian. Some of the crew and the staff were American, but by law they had to have so many people from Britain because they were filming in Britain. Had to be working, right, to do the legal. And the people in Britain were like the best at what they did, but the pace of how they did it and the way they did it was different than they do it in the States and Canada. And Cameron's like, he's a slave driver. And I remember an interview with Michael Biehn. Okay, people would remember him as Kyle Reese from The Terminator, but he played Corporal Hicks in Aliens. And there's a point why I'm bringing this up. We'll bring it to a musical perspective in a second, but I remember him saying James Cameron wore people out, and they had an actor there named James Remar. He was with the Warriors. He played Corporal Hicks initially. Some things weren't working out. He got let go, and Michael Biehn, the guy who played, they called him on a dime, said, "Can you come in and do this? Like, fly in from LA, like now. We're in London." So he flew in and he was talking about it, but he was saying that James Cameron was hard on people, but he said it's a perspective of attitude. He said, James Cameron would come up to me and say, "I don't like when you did that. Do not do that." And he'd say, "Okay, big deal. What do you want? I'll do whatever you need. I'll do it." Where a lot of people just couldn't handle that attitude. So for some reason that popped into my head. A lot of musicians, again, probably, I don't know, like they probably weren't able to see the big picture, maybe due to their own insecurities or being overwhelmed. Like that probably affected them, like being critiqued like that, where a lot of really professional ones would say, "Hey man, you're paying the bills. Just tell me what to do and what I need to do to make you happy." I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense, everybody.
It does make sense. And we got back around there. Well done.
Yeah.
It doesn't, I see it just the other way though.
Yeah.
Like, had you heard of any of these musicians before you knew that they played with Prince? And they're all quite young. So who are they to say that the guy who's multi-platinum doesn't know what he's doing? And they've seen the evidence, So I don't think that they really, I think it would have been a personality thing for them to say, "I don't agree with you and I'm not going to do it."
I
And
think
I would imagine he would fire them. Of course he would.
now, I guess one of the things that gets me, and I want to stay on this topic because it's very good and there's some value here for the people watching. As a musician, as your growth is, I'm a much more mature musician now at 48. Like in my 20s, I didn't get it. Like he just would have been over my head. I would have just been crushed like a little worm trying to perform for him. I would have been out the door in 5 minutes. In my 30s, I might have lasted 15 minutes and I'd still be out the door. Now, hypothetically, if I was in a scenario like that to play on that level, first off, I'd want at least a 3-month heads up to work out and get in shape for that because I'm too old and I'm too fat. But if I did it, I would say, look, you're the man. You're paying me. I want you to be happy. Tell me what you want from me, and I'll do it. That would be my attitude now as a mature or somewhat mature. Some people might argue that 48-year-old musician. But
well, you get your wish because the 3 months of training he'd do at Paisley Park with you. He'd just rehearse you all day, every day. And if you're rehearsing for 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day, when are you going to go eat? Right, so the weight will come off pretty quick. I mean,
where's that Denny's at? Is there one near Paisley Park? Hello.
So Brown Mark in 1984 talked about doing the same song so long. He actually made a sandwich while still playing the bass. So these things, they were marathons, but I think they were stamina building exercises. Everything became muscle memory, and then he's able to go and lay on what looks to be improvised and would be semi-improvised for the actual show, but the band were basically a record. They were a human metronome at that point.
And I think it's I guess one of the cool things when you and I talk, I look at things from the musical performance technical, and I don't mean like just technical the musicianship. I mean the technical, like what mics are they using, how is the sound mixed, and you have your perspective, and I think that's one of the great things about our conversations. Now, you are the one that brought up the book, the Dwayne Tudol, the studio book, which seems very fascinating, and I do want to read it when I can set the time aside to do it. It is, I tell everybody, I say, look, you can learn about a band. If you, I don't want to name bands, but common bands people like let's say AC/DC. You could probably learn a lot about AC/DC. In a week or two, kind of a fairly stable lineup, not too much of a lineup change over the years that they've, you could probably learn about it. Prince, it's a life study. Like if you think I'm going to learn everything there is to learn about Prince in a month, forget it. It's not going to happen. But you brought up the book name. You brought up something very interesting. And again, I'm kind of pulling the veil off of kind of what happens behind the scenes with musicians. Having only been on a regional level, not an international level, obviously, but I know what it's like being a hired hand. I know what it's like saying to someone who their name's on the marquee, I say, hey, you've hired me for the month or for tonight. Just tell me what you want and I'll do it. I also have been the guy that owned the PA system, the lighting, the trailer, was the booking agent, the guy in the back, funding the band, paying all these little hidden expenses, having to deal with BS from some of the musicians that you have to pay with. And sometimes you're kind of like, wow, they're kind of making pretty good money playing with me 2 or 3 nights a week. They're making more than what they're making a week, and they're complaining all the time. Like, I don't know, I'm nice to them. I'm trying to, musicians are a very funny lot. Okay. But you brought this up, and you had talked, there's a little bit of talk about the business end of it. And now, you're not saying this. This is in Dwayne Tudol's book. We're not surmising here. This is written down on paperback. So, but we were talking about Wendy, and when they were kind of talking about money, and they made some financial suggestions to Prince.
Yeah. So just to give a bit of context, obviously the Revolution have had the major success of Purple Rain. Going into 1985, Prince starts palling up with Sheila E. and doing some work in the studio with her, and starts to bring her band onto stage.
Mm-hmm.
So by the end of 1985, and they finish with the tour, Prince is starting to put his next project together, which becomes the Parade album, and he's filming Under the Cherry Moon. but the Revolution are sort of growing. There's these extra members that have appeared, and we spoke about that before. So in an interview that Wendy Melvoin gave in, I think it was 2008, where it's referenced directly in Dwayne's book.
Now, before you say it, I'm just going to say, I would welcome Wendy to come on the channel to do a show down the road. You know, everyone has their own versions or whatever, but this was interesting, and I was hoping we could, you know, not to distract from the music too much, but sometimes some of the other stuff, it is kind of interesting and worth noting. But Wendy, you know, maybe someday we'll have you on the show if you're willing. Maybe you won't be willing. Maybe you'll say, "Who the hell are these guys? I don't want anything to do with that." I don't know. But anyway, please carry on.
So she suggests that I think because she sort of senses that maybe he's looking to change things. But at the same time, in the studio, even though the live performances are becoming less about the core Revolution members, in the studio, herself and Lisa are working with him closer than ever, and, you know, composing songs together. So she gives this interview, and it's quoted verbatim in the book, where she basically has the group lawyer draw up an agreement with Prince that because there's talk of a Japanese tour and a European perhaps leg of the tour, that they would give him 1 year service, but they'd like to be properly recompensed to the tune of $1 million each, the band members. And given Prince's trust issues, and, you know, the official line is, given his trust issues and the way that they sort of put it in front of him, he sees it as that they're out for the money, and maybe they're not the friends that he thought they were. And it becomes, you know, something that a few months later probably directly contributes to him abandoning the original core members of the Revolution. Like I say, it's an interview that Wendy gave, you know, 10 years before he died. But I think it's an interesting dynamic that, you know, she says in the same interview that they were on $800 a week, which is like $40,000 in 1986. So I would imagine that's probably good money for a session musician, a studio musician, you know, the kind of income that someone like a Steve Lukather would have before he joins Toto and becomes, you know, an actual star in his own right. So I think it was probably jarring for them to be thought of as actual musicians for hire, given what was going on with their personal lives and everything that was happening. Mm-hmm. But you know, looking at it now, I think $1 million is it's quite the ask. You
know. So if we could talk about that for a second. I'm just getting my thoughts because you know, a lot of people think, first and foremost, I wasn't there. You know, and we're talking about our viewpoint. Wendy was there, we weren't there. But I don't think people understand whoever's running the show, right? There's two ways to run a band. Okay, there's a democracy, which kind of, you know, have you ever done a democracy? It means everybody in the band helps with what they do to contribute to push the ship forward. But
yeah, which this clearly wasn't.
Yeah, and it
clearly wasn't from.
It's kind of like,
you know, it's Prince's band.
When you do the group project thing in high school, you know, do you ever feel like you're the only one doing the work? Have you ever had that feeling? But it's supposed to be a democracy, and you all got an A on that project that you had to spend all weekend doing, and nobody helped you. That's kind of like what a democracy is. Or then you have what's called a dictatorship, right? Which I think is more in this. Clearly, it's Prince's name, but you know, who's footing all the expenses, right? The people that tend to complain about the money, they're not throwing money in to pay for the expenses, or so I don't think people realize how much money has to go into keeping the machine going. I had a collectible from Metallica many years ago. I got to dig that out, and it had a sheet in it. It showed like their expense sheet to do a tour, the truckers, the equipment, the PA, the lighting, sound engineers, everything, equipment, like technicians. And it's like you're looking at going, oh my God, like did they have $5 left over to, you know, to go to Dunkin' Donuts and split a donut after? So people don't realize all that. And a lot of musicians are kind of clueless to that too, unless they've really run a business and understand. And of course, I think for 1985, $800 a week was a lot of money in 1985. It wouldn't be a bad wage. That would be a pretty good gig for a musician, a working musician now. And I'm probably suspicious that she probably had a lot of her expenses paid for that didn't come out of her pay, you know?
Possibly. I mean, I understand that they felt they were integral to Purple Rain and the success that and all the wealth that brought.
Yeah.
But let's take a contrary point of view. They're all 25 at this point, right? They're, in their early 20s. Let's fast forward to the Prince of 2016.
Yeah.
He's on his, what turns out to be final tour.
Yeah.
It's a piano and a microphone. And he's selling out, in some cases, arenas, in most cases, theaters.
Yeah.
There's no bill other than the sound guy, front of house sound.
Yeah.
And he brings his longtime guy, Scotty Baldwin, really lovely guy, speaks quite openly about this in interviews. And he alluded to kind of falling out with Prince towards the end for asking for, above market rate, considering it's basically just the two of them putting on the gig.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if Prince is picking up, let's say, $500,000 a show, because there's absolutely zero overheads, Scotty asked for like $50,000 a show. And Prince scoffed, like, no sound guy gets $50,000 a show.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they don't, nor should they,
Mm-hmm.
unless it's peculiar circumstances. And I would argue two men going around the world with a bodyguard is peculiar circumstances, because no other band has ever done it. Even Ed Sheeran, when he goes out with his, single acoustic guitar, he's not traveling, in a small unit where they can do everything when they turn up. So, I mean, I say all that to say, I don't know what the right answer is. And I can see both sides for the Revolution asking for all that money. And I can see both sides for Scotty asking for all that money.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? If it was you and you were out and it was just you, would you pay your sound guy that much?
Well, when we have these discussions and things come up, I think of these other scenarios that I've heard of, kind of similar, pop up in my head. If anyone's seen the documentary Hired Gun, it was on Netflix, it's on Amazon. It's about session musicians. And one of it, they were talking about Billy Joel's band and Liberty, I forget his last name. He was a longtime drummer. Yeah.
Liberty DeVito, yeah.
And he was talking about how, after Billy Joel, there was a big legal thing. He had a manager who screwed him out of tens of millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big legal battle. And after that, Billy Joel was a little different. Well, who wouldn't be, but, and Liberty was talking about, he was going through a hard time. His second wife divorced, and I guess she was taking him to the cleaners. And one day he said to Billy Joel, he said, hey, if there's any scraps left over with this tour, could you throw them my way? And Billy Joel said, I wish you'd never said that to me. Mm. And then pretty soon he was out of the band. So I think money is a weird thing. You and I have had discussions about that. Again, I'm going to get into another quick little Bryanism. This thing we talked about in a different perspective. There's a metal band called Testament. They're a very big thrash band. They always say if there's the big five, they'd be one of them. And I'll try and make this as quick as I can. They had their original lineup break up in '92. It was a hard time with grunge and everything, but they kind of stuck with it, had different session guys, and they had this big reunion. They're doing really big business now. They're doing very good now. They had a reunion in 2005, and the original lead guitar player, who's world famous and amazing, and the bass player rejoined. The bass player played with them for a few years, and they started publicly bitching about the money. Now he was making, and he posted his, what's that called in the United States? Their income tax. There's a name for it in the States, but he made $40,000 a year.
Yeah.
And people were going, and he had a big fuss because the singer and the other guitar player who run the band, they're making really good money. They're doing very well for themselves. And I remember one time I got into this debate on YouTube with somebody, and I explained to him he wasn't a working musician. I said, look, he's playing bass. He gets to play in an international band. He has opportunities if he hustles to get endorsements. He can hustle to do seminars. He could do. The lead guitar player, world famous guy, he has all kinds of endorsements. He has his own guitar line with ESP guitars. He does seminars all over. He'll do independent gigs, jazz gigs on the side. He's a hustler, but this bass player, he's known for not paying his bills, for having drug addiction problems. And so what did the band do? They just got rid of him and got an even better guy that was more reliable come in. And like, and I was trying to explain, 40 grand to play in that and all the opportunities presented to you, I would just shut up and try and make the most of it. But that's just me. But getting back to the, you know, I think for people, and also too, where some of the money comes in too, is if you're a songwriter and you're getting the royalties for it, right? So if people look at Metallica, I'm sorry for all the metal references, but that's my world, part of my world. But like, if you look at Metallica, if you look at the net worth of the drummer, Lars Ulrich, the rhythm guitar and vocalist, James Hetfield, their net worth, what is it at? It's like $500 million each now. The lead guitar player, Kirk Hammett, it's 75 million, and the bass player, he's still relatively new to the band, but they don't get the royalties that Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield do either, because they're the main songwriters, so they get a lot of the. So I think if Wendy wrote songs and contributed to it, she should definitely also, on top of her salary, get royalties. But I think that's a big part of where the money comes from too.
Yeah, and we shouldn't really be saying Wendy. I mean, this is Wendy, Lisa, Bobby, and Brown Mark who put this document in front of him.
Yeah.
I only brought up Scotty just to kind of show how there is no black and white, right? And the older we get, the more that we realize there are no black and whites in the world. Everything is a shade of gray.
Yeah.
And, you know, to quote a Prince lyric, even at the center of fire, there's cold. You know, everything's yin and yang, isn't it? So I really don't know what the right answers are. I just think probably if they weren't in their mid-20s, maybe they would resolve it in a better way. And
exactly,
you know, were they able to get endorsements? You know, or was Prince keeping his, you know, a close eye on that and perhaps forbidding that? Whereas if they were in their mid-30s, they would say, well, okay, well, you can forbid it, but like, you make me whole then, because I'm leaving 200 grand on the table here. So I don't know, but I think a lot of what makes the revolution such a talking point is it's that interaction of success and youth. Whereas for all the success he has, you know, around the Super Bowl and, you know, the Coachella, getting paid $4 million to headline Coachella, there's none of this being talked about in the background because the youth isn't there, and the inexperience and the regret and all of those things. And,
you know, we're giving our opinions. We weren't there. So, and I'm only giving like an actual working musician's perspective. You're giving your own informative perspective. I am curious, so at the end, what was Prince's relationship with Scotty Baldwin, the sound guy? So,
yeah, Scotty he was one of these guys who, you know, was hired for a different job and then sort of found his way in the Prince camp. So I think originally he was Michael Bland's drum tech.
Yeah.
And as Michael joins the New Power Generation and Prince's band, Scotty sort of migrates onto front of house sound engineering, and is, you know, there's probably one major Prince live CD that came out, and that's the One Night Alone tour, 3 CD set, and the sound is impeccable. And Scotty's really, really good at his job. And like everyone who, because we see the band members and we kind of think they're the extension of the Prince world, the full extent. And then we hear of the engineers and they sort of get brought in, you know, as the studio people. But you've got people like Leroy Bennett, and Roy works with Paul McCartney, Lady Gaga now.
Yeah.
And this is because of Prince. You know, it's like Roy's incredibly talented. Prince sees that, gives him the gig, and then where do you go when you've got Prince on your CV?
Yeah.
You don't go and work with, you know, the NSYNC who are, you know, just getting signed to the label.
Yeah.
You work with the headliners. So all of these people are now at the top of their game and the top of the industry if they chose to stay in the industry.
I think so. When we're talking about this too, so like we talked about Liberty with Billy Joel, we talked about Scotty Baldwin with Prince. I think though, you know, there comes a time where you can sit down and try and renegotiate. Like one of the reasons I really got into teaching guitar, learning how to run my own business under my own name, and I did very well at it. In fact, I part of with my YouTube, at some point, I'd like to do some, just a few videos on, tips to help struggling guitar teachers to become better with their business. I remember I taught at a music school, and I was there for 5 years. And, I appreciated the job. They started me with 4 students, and they complained about never having any good guitar teachers. I was there for 5 years. When I finally gave my notice and left, they had 65 guitar students under me, and I had good retention. I kept students for a long time, but there wasn't any difference in pay. And even when I was supposed to be paid, things got kind of weird. So I kind of knew it was my time to exit. But the point I'm trying to make is, if anyone, like a musician, has ever had a job and you appreciate it, but when you've done a good job and after a number of years, I think everyone, I don't know a lot of those musicians on the level, they do it through lawyers or whatever, but they can renegotiate and just say, hey, can I have there has to be a way to do it to not offend the person in charge, because the person in charge is probably thinking, hey man, I'm giving you an international stage, and I'm giving you an opportunity, and you're getting paid. And now you're after, you know what I mean? I think there's a lot of trust issues.
Yeah.
With money's involved too. And you've alluded to that too, with trust issues.
Yeah. I mean, speaking about Scotty specifically, I mean, this is a guy who could be working with, Lady Gaga on her tour. And yet he's, traveling around Sydney with Prince doing front of house for a guy who's just sitting at a piano.
Yeah.
So I think it's different if you're at the start of your career and you're not established, and then there's one way to ask for a pay rise.
Yeah.
But I think towards the end, perhaps, let's just say it, maybe Prince has taken liberties with the loyalty of a couple of people.
It happens. It happens.
At what point do you reward someone for 20 years of being your guy? So I think that would have been a nice thing for him to do. And if he did it and Scotty never told anyone, it would have been a lovely thing for him to know, right, that he's financially secure for the rest of his life because of a handful of shows, and it didn't really take anything out of Prince's pocket. But I mean, it's really hard to talk about these things without it coming across as negative or positive. Exactly. I just think it adds to it shows that it's a real life, isn't it? As much as he's a performer and a rock star,
and every situation can be different. Every situation can be different. That we weren't there, we don't know the exact ins and outs and whatever. But let's take a few more Patreon questions, okay?
While you find the next one, can I just point out, if anyone hasn't read the books that Dwayne Tudol has put together, they are absolutely fantastic. They're between the periods of 83 to 86. So each book is 2 years. But he basically creates a calendar. What did Prince do on each day? And it might be recording in the studio, which of course he does a lot of.
That would be pretty cool to check that out.
It's absolutely phenomenal. When you see it written down and you see the sheer effort that is going in, you can understand that maybe he's not making the most rational of decisions.
Yes.
Because he's spinning half a dozen plates. He's got a movie on the go. He's in the studio trying to write not only his own album, but 2 or 3 different artists, and they are fantastic books. They're a little dry because it's, a history of a guy going and what did he do each day. But I think we need more people like that in the arena, because I don't think there's anyone who's going to be given the opportunity, the wealth, have the energy and the ability, the musical ability to do what Prince did. And I think Dwayne does everybody a great service by actually documenting this stuff. So everyone should go out and buy the book.
Yeah. And the book is Dwayne, Dwayne
Tudol, Duane,
okay.
Tudol, Tudahl, and they are the 2 books are Prince, the Purple Rain era sessions, and the second book is Prince and the Parade and Sign of the Time studio sessions.
Do you think Prince was human? Like just not even the musical aspect, just the output, watts of power or calories of energy, whatever unit you want to put him under. I don't know.
I mean, there's every now and again you just get a special human being, don't you? And I think it lets us all off the hook if we call him an alien or we say that he's not human, because then it takes the necessity for us to kind of live up to that example.
Yeah.
I just think, he was born to do what he did. had the right circumstances to drive him to do what he did.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll ever get the likes of that again. And if a person comes along who's got all of that, I don't think the industry or human attention where we are right now in the world would allow someone like that to come up through and rise to the top, because we're incredibly fragmented at the moment. We have a million things that can take our attention away.
Yeah.
And this is what you see when you see the book. This is a guy who's a multimillionaire, the most famous person in America. He doesn't choose to spend 5 minutes after a concert shaking hands with anyone. He's straight into a car down to the studio, and he just wants to create more music, or he's off to an after show where he wants to play more music. And those, I think it shows what a sort of a special character he was, and the drive that he had inside him.
You know, you and I have had here, but even off recording, we've had many topics about money, lots of different things. We've talked about politics. We've talked about, all kinds of different topics, but let's just talk about that for a second with money. Okay. And I'm going to give everyone my personal feeling. One of the things I used to always wonder when I'd see bands like the Rolling Stones, I'll even use Metallica, we could say Prince, anyone who becomes an international act and who becomes famous and very wealthy. Do you think some people have motivational issues at that point? They're like, well, I got tens of millions of dollars in the bank. Like for me, I used to think, oh my God, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't want to keep touring in that. I'd want to get like a nice log cabin up in the Rockies and, get a big, Ford or I better not. That's a polarizing topic. I won't mention brands of vehicles I like here, folks. I'm going to upset all the Dodge people out there. But, if you look at Garth Brooks, right? Like he just got to a point. He's like, I'm still kind of young and I have tens of millions of dollars and my kids, grandkids aren't going to have to work. So, and when he chooses to come out again, it's because he wants to do a show. It's not because he feels he has to. But when I see these guys in their 50s, 60s, 70s still grinding, I'm like, maybe it makes them happy. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, for me, there's always two aspects. What does the money mean to you? Because if you come from nothing, money is security. Yeah. Once you get wealth, and then, maybe there's a fear that that money gets taken away from you, which I'm sure the early younger Prince would have felt. By the time he's sort of 35 and he knows he's never ever going to go broke. Yeah. It's a different man, isn't it? Because it's like, okay, well, maybe I can, take my fear and just put it to one side. Yeah. But I think the other side is something that we've touched on before. How much of a choice did he actually have? I don't think he had much choice to create. I think there were times in his life where he tried to stay out of the studio because of marriages and things, certain periods of his life. And I don't think it really ever took hold. Well,
you're bringing up a good topic, and this is your opinion that I want, and you're entitled to your opinion about somebody who's researched a lot of Prince, and I'm going to give you my less educated opinion about Prince. I couldn't see if Prince, we've all been in relationships where we've had to kind of put aside things that were important to us and what we wanted to do to try and make someone else happy at times. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just, it's life. I don't think Prince would have, I know for me, you're aware that I'd come down with a sickness and I was sick for a couple of weeks. I had a couple of weeks where I barely touched the guitar and I get crusty. So do you think Prince would be fine just, hanging out with a girlfriend or someone he was seeing seriously and not really getting his creative, and it's kind of like what people don't understand too. When you're an artist or a musician, when you have that idea in your head, sometimes you got to get to whatever you need to record it or write it down or take note of it, or else it's gone. You can have a great idea in your head and then it's gone. I've been there many times.
So let me give you two quick stories out of the Dwayne Tudol book. Same year, 1986. Prince comes off the back of 80 leg tour, Purple Rain, says to his manager, I want a vacation. They go to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. The first day they go to the beach. They get up the second day and Prince says, right, what are we doing today? So we're going back to the beach again. It's like, I've done that, I'm going home. So his Rio de Janeiro vacation lasts 3 days. And he's immediately back in Minneapolis, standing next to a DJ in a club, saying, you know, play this record. I want to see how the crowd react. So that's kind of the nice side, right? Where he doesn't need to do a vacation because he's easily bored. But then there's the other story where he's at the drummer, one of his best friends, one of his oldest friends, is getting married. And the day of the reception, the wedding day, the afternoon of the wedding, Prince says, band rehearsal. I need to record a song. So a guy who's just got married hours before has to go to the rehearsal space, and they have to cut a track because Prince feels he needs to get it out of him. Now, I read that and I thought, what a prick. You know, you can't just hold it for 12 hours.
Yeah.
He ruins. Now, the guy won't say he ruined my wedding day. Where if it was mine, I would be saying it.
Yeah.
But again, it's the two sides of the man, right?
Yeah. So I you know, again, our conversations go by so fast. I know I have probably an undiagnosed form of certain forms of OCD. I'm suspicious. I'm a little suspicious. Prince had something going on. That was also part of why he was such an amazing. Probably part of why he needed to be at the recording studio. Probably why he did as well as he did, and why he was so proficient on so many instruments. Yeah, I just remember, you know, when you're in those circumstances, having to put what's important to you aside. It's not being overly happy about it. But again, that might be, maybe that's due to improper brain function. I don't know. But I just remember more recently just not being able to pick up my guitar for a week or longer, and I was not happy. You know, I like my time when I can sit down and do my work. So, and I mean, so I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Prince. But let's take another Patreon question.
Okay.
And then we'll probably say goodbye to everyone. And then we have our Patreon after show to do. The Patreon after show, folks, it's we have our patrons come on and they talk with myself and the Solitary Adventurer, and we talk about a lot of things: Prince, music, guitar, all kinds of fun stuff. So we have one here from Wanda Manning. Wanda. She's a friend. She's a valued member of our YouTube community, and also she's a Patreon here. Okay. She would like to know from Solitary Adventurer who his favorite Prince dancer was.
So Prince dances basically start in '87 when he recruits Cat Glover. Then when she leaves, he has Maite, who he later marries. And then we get sort of dancers coming in and out. There was a girl called Geneva around the 2000s. And then it sort of crystallizes again where he uses the twins in 2006, 2007 onwards. I think the only dancer for me really was Cat Glover from the Sign of the Times and Lovesexy era. It's strange because I kind of became a fan where Maite was the only dancer, you know, that I knew of. And I kind of liked what she did, you know, as the foil, you know, to his performance. But when you look back at what he was doing with Cat and then Cat and Sheila E. During Lovesexy, I mean, it's the period of time where his choreography steps up. So I don't think Cat gets the recognition perhaps that she deserves for introducing something into his act that never really left. You know, once he danced with her, there was always a dancer in some form in the band. And that's, you have to take your hat off to Cat for that. So Cat Glover for me.
Yeah, what Wanda was saying, Cat was her favorite too. I wonder when Maite was involved in the performance. Yeah. I wonder if the dynamics changed. Now, the few times I've been involved in a band or for the most part, or where a couple and one person was in management, one person was in the band, knowing what I know now in those types of situations, I'd turn and run away. But I wonder with Prince and his wife, when she was involved in performance, if it changed the dynamics of how he was with everyone backstage, how he treated everyone.
Well, she was the dancer and then became the wife.
Yeah.
So, you know, she was dancing for him before she became officially a girlfriend, and then obviously later they get married. I think there's certainly a dynamic change once they get married, and then suddenly she's maybe not dancing because she's, a wife who should be kept at home and let's start a family. And I think that side of things started to come in.
And
But
they went through some hardship. They had a child together.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, they did, and
And
that ended tragically, and then the marriage soon after.
so,
But
and I'm
the one
assuming.
story,
No, please. Go
sorry,
ahead.
the one story that came to me then is when they got married, they honeymooned in Hawaii, and Prince put on a series of shows in Hawaii. So even the honeymoon was a working vacation, a busman's holiday. So it just goes to show you the kind of mentality that the guy had, that he just
She
couldn't
must have
switch
knew
it
what she
off
was
at
getting
times.
into, though. She must have knew what she was getting
Yeah.
into. So I
And
think
also, she was quite young. She was
Yeah.
noticeably younger than him. I think uncomfortably so, and
Yeah.
I think a few other people share that. Certainly, the woman who goes through the tragedy of losing a child is at least a few years older and a bit more grown into herself, that she can handle that. But certainly, the dancer who turns up in 92, it's uncomfortable when you look at the age difference. But she absolutely knew what he was like by the time she said yes to a marriage proposal.
I remember reading a funny interview with Yngwie Malmsteen many years ago when he got married, and he said, I took my guitar on the honeymoon, like so he could practice and play. So she had to know what she was getting to. And just on a final note, before we wind it down for this session, I'm sure that their probably business relationship fractured at the end of the marriage. I don't think she probably didn't work with him in any capacity after, did she?
She didn't. No, there's not really much on the record other than Maite's account in her book. They were pretty much estranged after the marriage. His second wife, Manuela, I believe, she kept one of the charities that they'd set up together, and she was doing a lot of philanthropic work.
Okay.
And that seemed to be, I would say, a smoother breakup. Whereas the Maite one, obviously, the sheer amount of heartache, I don't think it could have stayed on as a friendship or that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, guys, as we get going in it, we get into these conversations and the time flies. I love discussing things for the Solitary Adventure. Are there any questions that you guys want to see me ask the Solitary Adventure? Are there any topics you'd like for us to talk about? Post it down in the comments section. And we hope to have them back again soon for our wonderful conversations. And remember, practice hard, but practice smart. We'll see you soon.